All right. I have to be honest. I've been dreading this one a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, it's not because the content isn't important. I mean, it's probably the most important topic we've ever covered.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the source material is so intimidating. It is dense. It was written back in 1949.
Right.
And quite frankly, the font size in my copy is terrifyingly small.
Right.
We're talking about The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham.
It is a brick. It's not exactly a beach read, that's for sure.
No.
But if you talk to anyone who manages serious money or, anyone who's built generational wealth in the market, this book is probably sitting on their nightstand.
It's considered the definitive text on value investing.
It is.
Right. And that's where the intimidation comes from. It has this mythical status, the Bible of investing. And Graham is called the father of value investing.
And for good reason. I mean, he was a financial analyst and educator at Columbia Business School.
And his most famous student, of course.
Warren Buffett, yeah. The ultimate credential.
Exactly. So my skepticism right out of the gate is this. The world in 1949 was very different.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have high-frequency trading algorithms. We didn't have crypto. We didn't have Reddit forums pumping stocks to the moon.
True.
So our mission today isn't just to worship at the altar of Benjamin Graham. I want to find out if this 75-year-old advice actually holds up.
That is a fair challenge. The markets have changed mechanically, yes.
Yeah.
But I think what you find is that human psychology, greed, fear, the desire to get rich quick
That hasn't changed?
hasn't changed one bit.
Yeah.
Graham wasn't writing about algorithms. He was writing about human nature.
Well, speaking of human nature, let's get into the most uncomfortable question the book asks.
I know where you're going with this.
It basically forces you to look in the mirror and ask, am I an investor or am I just a speculator? Because before I read this, I assumed that if I, opened a brokerage app and bought a share of Tesla, I was investing.
And Graham would say, probably not.
He seems to think I might just be gambling.
He absolutely does, and he draws a very, very hard line there. In the very first chapter, he just strips away the vanity of the title investor.
So just because you bought a stock doesn't count?
Not at all.
Yeah.
He gives a definition that is incredibly rigorous.
Yeah.
He says an investment is an operation which, upon thorough analysis, promises safety of principal and an adequate return.
And anything that doesn't meet those requirements
Is speculation. Period. End of story.
Okay, let's break that down. It sounds like a legal disclaimer. Thorough analysis. What does that actually look like?
Right. It's not reading a Wall Street Journal article or looking at a price chart.
No.
No. And that's where most people fail immediately. For Graham, thorough analysis is mathematical, not narrative. He's talking about digging into the financial statements.
Like the 10K filings and everything?
Everything. You're looking at earnings history. Has this company made money consistently for, say, 10 years? You're looking at dividend records. You're looking at book value.
What the actual assets of the company are worth?
Exactly. If you liquidated it today, if you're buying a stock just because you like the product or because your neighbor mentioned it, you have effectively skipped the analysis part.
So if I buy Apple because I think the Vision Pro is cool, I'm speculating.
By Graham's definition, yes, absolutely. That is a speculation on future growth based on a product opinion. It's not an investment.
That feels like a really high bar. What about safety of principal? That sounds impossible. I mean, there's no such thing as a risk-free stock.
You're right. There is no risk-free asset. But he isn't saying you can never lose money. He's talking about the probability of a permanent loss.
I see.
If you buy a speculative crypto coin, there's a high probability that your initial money could go to zero.
Right.
But if you buy a blue chip company that is trading below its liquidation value, which is what Graham loved to find, the probability of permanent loss is statistically very low. You protect the downside first.
And the third one was adequate return. I'm guessing adequate in 1949 meant something a little different than the 10x returns people chase today.
Adequate is the key word. The speculator wants to turn $1,000 into $10,000 in a month. The investor, according to Graham, is looking for a steady, compoundable return that beats inflation and justifies the risk.
That's boring.
It's boring, it's not going to make you the life of the party, but it's sustainable.
I think that's the hardest pill to swallow. We're wired for the lottery ticket. But Graham warns that the most dangerous thing isn't even the speculation itself.
It's deluding yourself. That is the critical warning in Chapter 1.
Right.
He says if you want to speculate, fine, go ahead. Put aside maybe 10% of your money in a separate account. Call it your mad money.
Treat it like a trip to Vegas.
Exactly. But never, ever mingle that with your actual investment account. The moment you start thinking your gambling is investing is the moment you get ruined.
So, assuming we're all sufficiently shamed and want to be actual investors now, Graham says we have to pick a personality type. You're either defensive or enterprising.
Right. And people often misunderstand these labels. They think defensive means weak or scared, and enterprising means, smart and rich.
But that's not it.
No, it's actually about effort. It's about how much time you are willing to dedicate to this.
Okay, let's start with the defensive investor. This is the passive approach, right?
It is, but it's a disciplined passivity. The defensive investor's primary goal is freedom from bother.
I like the sound of that.
You don't want to spend your weekends reading financial filings. You want to make decent returns with minimal stress.
So what does that portfolio look like? Is it just savings bonds?
No, Graham actually advises against being 100% in anything. He suggests a split. Traditionally, it was a 50-50 split between high-grade bonds and high-quality common stocks.
And you adjust that based on the market.
You can. If the market gets way too high, maybe you shift to 75% bonds. If the market crashes and stocks are cheap, you might shift to 75% stocks. But you never go all in or all out.
This brings up dollar cost averaging,
Okay.
which he pushes really heavily.
Which sounds incredibly simple.
But it's not.
Psychologically, it is brutal.
Why?
Because it means you are buying when the news is terrible. When the market drops 20% and everyone is screaming, sell, the defensive investor is mechanically buying more shares.
Because the system says to.
The system dictates it. It requires an iron will to be that passive.
Okay, so that's the defensive route. But let's be real. Everyone listening to this wants to be the enterprising investor.
Of course.
We want to beat the market. We want to be the smart money. What does Graham require from us if we choose that lane?
He requires you to treat it as a full-time business. This is not a hobby.
Right.
The enterprising investor is trying to find stocks that are undervalued by the market. So you're looking for companies with sound financials that are temporarily unpopular.
Special situations, bankruptcies, stuff like that.
So spin-offs, reorganizations.
So you're dumpster diving.
In a way, yes. You're looking for things that other people are throwing away. But here is the catch that I think most aspiring enterprising investors miss.
What's that?
To beat the market, you have to be correct when the consensus is wrong. If you buy Microsoft, because everyone loves Microsoft, you are paying a premium price for that. There's no advantage there. You have to buy what is unloved.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. And Graham is very blunt about this. He says most people should just be defensive investors. The amount of work required to get just a few extra percentage points of return is massive.
And if you try to be enterprising without doing the work,
You will perform worse than the passive index, guaranteed.
this all leads us to what I think is the single most important concept in the whole book. We have to talk about his imaginary friend,
The manic-depressive business partner.
Mr. Market.
Chapter 8. This is the parable that changed Warren Buffett's life.
Okay, set the scene for us. Who is Mr. Market?
So imagine you own a business, let's say a hardware store, and you have a partner, Mr. Market. And every single day, this guy comes to your office and offers to either buy your share of the business or sell you his share
Every day.
every single day. But here's the thing. Mr. Market is emotionally unstable.
Some days he's euphoric.
Right. Some days he sees sunshine and rainbows, and he offers you a ridiculously high price for your share.
And other days.
Other days, he's terrified. He sees a recession, a war, a pandemic, and he offers to sell you his share for pennies on the dollar.
And the mistake we all make is we look at Mr. Market price and we assume he knows something we don't.
Precisely. If he offers a low price, we think, oh no, the business must be failing. But Graham says, no, the business hasn't changed, only the price has.
So you use him.
You exploit him. You see his quote as a convenience, not a guide. When he's manic and offering a high price, you can sell to him. When he's depressed and offering a low price, you buy from him.
It effectively separates price from value.
That's it. Price is what you pay, value is what you get.
But in the real world, this is so hard. When the market crashes, when Mr. Market is depressed, we feel depressed too. We check our 401k and we feel poor.
That is because we confuse the quotation with our wealth. Graham wants you to view market volatility not as a risk, but as an opportunity.
Right.
If you're a buyer of groceries, you like it when the supermarket has a sale. But for some reason, when stocks go on sale, we panic. Graham teaches you to welcome the bear market.
Because that's when you make your real money.
You just don't realize it until years later.
That reframing it's really powerful.
Or
But there is a silent killer that can wreck this whole plan, even if you manage your emotions perfectly.
inflation.
We need to talk about inflation. This is chapter 2, and it feels weirdly relevant right now.
It is incredibly relevant. For a long time, we had low inflation, so people kind of forgot about it. But Graham's data from 1915 to 1970 show that inflation is a constant cyclical threat.
And he destroys a really common myth,
Yeah.
the idea that stocks are a perfect hedge against inflation.
Yeah.
I've heard this 1,000 times. Cash is trash. Buy stocks because companies can just raise prices.
Right. If Coca-Cola costs more, Coke makes more money, stock goes up. Seems simple.
So why does Graham say that's wrong?
Because of the money illusion and the mechanics of corporate finance. Think about it. Yes, a company can raise its prices, but inflation affects its inputs too.
Labor costs go up, raw materials go up.
Exactly. But the real killer is capital expenditure and depreciation.
Okay, break that down. Depreciation is usually just an accounting line item. Why does it matter so much here?
Okay, imagine a factory has a machine that cost $1 million 10 years ago. They depreciate it on their books, setting aside money to replace it.
Right.
But now, because of inflation, that same machine costs $2 million to replace. The money they set aside isn't enough. So they have to take real cash profits just to stay in business. They're running just to stand still.
So their reported earnings might look high in dollar terms, but their actual purchasing power is shrinking.
Correct. Inflation acts as a hidden tax on capital. So Graham warns you can't just blindly buy stocks and assume you're safe.
So if stocks aren't a perfect shield and cash is literally melting, what did Graham suggest? Did he tell everyone to buy gold bars?
Actually, no. He was very skeptical of gold. He looked at the data and found that gold didn't provide any income. It just sits there.
It relies on the greater fool theory.
Exactly. It has no internal yield.
So what's the alternative?
In his time, it was difficult. He leaned heavily on that balanced portfolio. But modern commentators, like Jason Zweig, who edited the newer editions, they point to tools Graham didn't have,
Like what?
specifically TIPSS.
Treasury inflation protected securities.
Yes. These are government bonds where the principal value actually rises with the consumer price index. It's the only asset class that's mathematically guaranteed to keep up with inflation.
What about real estate? That's the other classic inflation hedge.
Graham acknowledged it, but we have to add some modern nuance. People talk about REITs, real estate investment trusts, and yes, rents generally rise with inflation. But
we saw in 2008 and even in 2022 that REITs can be incredibly volatile. They are very sensitive to interest rates. So it's not a magic shield. You still need that margin of safety.
this brings us to the modern era. We've been talking about factories and machinery, but the biggest companies today, Apple, Google, Microsoft, their value is in code, brand, intellectual property.
Right.
Does Graham's book value analysis even work anymore?
That is the biggest criticism of strict value investing today. Graham focused on tangible assets, things you could kick. If a factory went bust, you could sell the machinery.
If Google goes bust, you can't really sell the search algorithm at an auction.
Not easily, no.
So do we throw the book out?
No, we adapt the principle. The accounting has changed, but the philosophy hasn't. Whether you're valuing a factory or a software ecosystem, you're still trying to determine the future cash flows of that business. The thorough analysis just requires different metrics now.
But the psychology part, that seems more relevant than ever. We have behavioral economics now, guys like Daniel Kahneman and Nassim Taleb. I think they vindicate Graham completely. Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for proving that humans are irrational. We suffer from loss aversion, overconfidence.
All the things Graham was warning about.
He didn't have the scientific terms for it, but his whole system was designed to cage that irrationality. The rules of the defensive investor are basically guardrails to stop our monkey brains from doing stupid things.
And Taleb's black swans?
Those unpredictable, massive events, they align perfectly with Graham's core concept, the margin of safety.
Let's define that before we wrap up. Chapter 20, the margin of safety. It sounds like an engineering term.
It is engineering. If you build a bridge that needs to hold a 10,000-pound truck, you don't build it to hold exactly 10,000 pounds.
Right.
You build it to hold 30,000 pounds. That gap is your margin of safety. It protects you from bad luck, from errors, from the unknown.
And in investing.
If you calculate that a company is worth $100 per share, you don't buy it at 95. You wait, and you buy it at 60. That $40 gap protects you from your own miscalculations, from a pandemic, from a CEO scandal.
If you pay full price, you have to be 100% right about the future.
And nobody is 100% right about the future.
That's the real takeaway for me. It's about humility. The speculator thinks they can predict the future. The investor knows they can't, so they build a buffer.
Humility and discipline, that is the essence of the entire book.
So let's bring this home. If someone's sitting there looking at their portfolio right now, what's the checklist? The do's and don'ts.
Number 1, stop lying to yourself. Distinguish between your investing and your speculating. If you're chasing meme stocks, acknowledge it as gambling. Don't bet your retirement on it.
Number 2,
Choose your path. Be defensive or be enterprising. If you aren't willing to do the hard work, just accept the passive returns of the market. Don't try to be a halfway aggressive investor. That's the quickest way to lose.
and finally,
Respect Mr. Market, but don't trust him. Use his mood swings, and never ever buy an asset without a margin of safety.
I want to leave everyone with one thought that really hit me. We live in an era of hype. We buy things because we think they will go up. But Graham asks us to fundamentally change why we buy.
It comes down to the greater fool theory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Are you buying an asset because it produces value, cash flow, dividends, real earnings? Or are you buying it solely because you hope someone more foolish than you will pay a higher price next week?
If you're relying on a greater fool, eventually you run out of fools.
And then you're the one left holding the bag.
And you don't want to be that person.
That is the history of every single bubble. From Dutch tulips to the dot-com crash, value investing is about making sure you aren't the one left holding the bag.
A sobering but very necessary lesson. The Intelligent Investor. It's a dense read, but maybe the most profitable one you'll ever get through. Thanks for unpacking it with me.
My pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners. Go check your portfolios, check your margin of safety, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.